I'm Susan Williamson, the Festival Director. Welcome to the 17th Annual Palm Beach Poetry Festival, our first virtual festival, and to our conference faculty reading featuring Lorna Knowles Blake, Sally Bliumis-Dunn, Nickole Brown, Jessica Jacobs, and Angela Narciso Torres. These gifted poet teachers work with individuals on their poetry manuscripts in one-on-one conferences to help them achieve their personal writing goals. Now it's time for them to shine. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our founder and president, Miles Kuhn, and his wife, Mimi, our sponsors, Morgan Stanley, the Legacy Group of Atlanta, Gladstone Multimedia, the Cultural Council of Palm Beach County, Visit Florida, Murder on the Beach, Bookstore, the National Endowment for the Arts, and all our other sponsors and supporters. Following this reading, the poets will be signing individual book plates for the books you purchase in our virtual bookstore. I'll be putting the link to that bookstore meeting in the chat during the meeting for a couple of times. Now I'm going to introduce our first poet, Lorna Knowles Blake, and she will introduce the poet who follows her, and so on. Lorna Knowles Blake is author of Green Hill, her most recent book of poetry, and a recipient of the 2017 Able Muse Award. She serves on the editorial board at the journal Barrow Street and on the advisory committee for WCAI's Poetry Sundays radio program. She teaches creative writing in Brewster, on Cape Cod, and in New Orleans. Please welcome Lorna Knowles Blake. Okay.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you to Miles and Mimi, Susan and Jennifer, and this year especially the interns and the tech angels who make all this virtual magic happen. It's really a pleasure to be here. I'm going to start tonight with a little sort of seasonal liminal poem. Normally at this time of the year I'm in New Orleans where it's pretty sunny and bright, but this year I'm in Cape Cod where the weather is significantly different. This is called Manna. Even in this grim, immutable month, there are signs. Forbearance in the stripped trees, patience in the packed ground. Each day the wind chides, each day enough will be given. I'm going to continue with some poems, a little suite of poems based on William Blake's Proverbs of Hell. I do this a lot. I'm sort of fascinated by these proverbs, and every once in a while I find myself gravitating back towards them and picking one and then just sort of writing in a conversation with the proverb. And surprising things happen when I do that. The first one is called Drive Your Cart and Plow Over the Bones of the Dead. That afternoon she sat, chain-smoking, under a broad-leafed oak, until one by one the night put out its stars. At her feet, a cardboard box, harmonica, an open fifth of scotch, his stamp collection, a medal won during the war. They'd known each other less and less. Absence stung no more than salt rubbed in a wound's old scars. She crumpled the empty pack, carried the box across wet grass and gravel, and stowed it in the dark trunk of her car. So I'm going to continue with the Proverbs of Hell theme. This one is basically just riffing on a famous Blake poem, jumping off of the proverb, "The cut worm forgives the plow. O plow, thou art quick, the invisible worm that lies in your path, in the furrowed ground, has forgiven your blade of hardened steel, the horse that pulled you, and the cart's cold wheel." The next one is called The crow wished everything was black, the owl that everything was white. A crow's invisible at night, black wing, black eye, caw, caw. The owl nocturnal hunts by night. A crow invisible at night, because he isn't snowy white, eludes the owl's beak and claw. A crow's invisible at night, black wing, black eye, caw, caw. If every living thing were white, an owl would clearly see. Hoo, hoo. A moon can make a light more bright, and every living thing more white. A clear down drop, the bloody swoop. Much easier to hunt by night, if every living thing were white. The owl could see his prey. Hoo, hoo. And the next one is called Bring Out Number, Weight, and Measure in a Year of Dearth. We've certainly had a year of something. I don't know if it's dearth, but the year after he died, she cooked, and not as if the two of them were at the table, but as if the whole family were expected for supper, all her numbered dead. She weighed the meat, then measured out ingredients for a banquet every day, the foods they loved and the foods they hated that were good for them. Recipes passed down from other countries, other times. In this way, she transformed a year of dearth into a year of plenty and threw it out each night. And then I'm going to read Dip him in the river who loves water. Dip him in the water of the river. Dip him in the river of the water. In the river, in the water, in the river, in the river, in the water. Rivers love the water, water loves the river, loves the river. Dip him in the water, in the water, in the river. Dip him who loves the water, dip him in the river who loves water. And finally, I'm going to read the last proverb that I've played with. No bird soars too high if he soars on his own wings. But in every generation it seems they try, remembering not the fall, but the heady lift of flight, the eagle soaring by. Like wax-winged Icarus, all too ready to borrow shiny wings and gain the sky, they risk the fearful plummet to earth or sea. And, stunned like garden birds who cannot see the plate glass air of windows, unsteady, numb with yearning, they rise again to fly. And I'm going to conclude with a praise poem. I sort of feel that that's one of the things that's gotten me and most of us, I think, through this really, really super difficult year. At least in my house, we've been trying to make an intentional practice of gratitude. So, and part of my gratitude is writing, so I thought I would read this poem. It's called Darwin's Doxology, and doxology in the Episcopal liturgy is just a great song of praise. Praise that roseate spoonbill, this rose-breasted grosbeak, every finch and every flower. Praise vegetable and mineral, carnivore and herbivore, snake and quadruped. Praise creatures apterous, edentate, mammalian, crustacean, monovalved and bi. Praise those with gills and fins and lungs, all that are here observed and classified, the fleet, the shy, the predatory, and the sly. Praise variations yet to come, and those preserved in stone. Praise the fire in the bone. Praise, praise, praise. Let it rain, let it pour, let it flow like a river from my pen to the page. Thank you very much. It is my great pleasure to introduce Sally Bliumis-Dunn. a dear friend and fine poet. She teaches modern poetry at Manhattanville College. In 2002, she was a finalist for the Nimrod Hardman Pablo Neruda Prize. Her books, Talking Underwater and Second Skin, were published by Wind Publications in 2007 and 2010, respectively. Her latest book, Echolocation, which was published in 2018 by Plume Editions, was a finalist for the Eric Hoffer Award and longlisted for the Julie Suck Award for Best Book of Poetry in 2018. Please welcome Sally Bliumis-Dunn. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorna. Thank you, Miles and Mimi and Susan and Jennifer and everyone who's made this festival happen. I'm so happy to be back at the Palm Beach Poetry Festival, and I'm hoping we can all be there in person next year. I'm going to read mostly new work, but I wanted to share this older poem I wrote when hearing the names read aloud of those who perished in 9/11. I read it now in memories of those we've lost to COVID. It's called Their Names. Like a rain, I feel but cannot see the names of the dead falling. Silences I hear between first names, middle, last, are slivers of empty air between lines of rain. I want to be in these tiny silences that cannot hold their deaths, but join them to all silence. Rests in a piece of music, the quiet beneath a rock, the feather on a crow, beak closed, wings perfectly still. I've always felt close to the natural world, but since the pandemic, that sense has been greatly heightened. We lived in Maine for the first 6 months of it, and each morning when I wrote, I would look out at the same exact trees. I wrote this poem after our return from 2 weeks away in New York. It was the first time we had left Maine since the pandemic had begun. View. For 6 months, I looked at these treetops from this same window, the irregular cross-hatching of their branches. And now that we've returned and I sit here once again, I have the sense that for all those nights we were gone, these trees visited me while I slept in a kind of recurring dream. Their design against the sky shone as from a projector, and I'd walk in front of the generous beam and their branches would cover my skin and move through me. I hadn't remembered this till now as they stand before me as though I had been missed. This next one is called Birches. I walk the rough stone driveway, and from their long white trunks, brighter than winter air, I sense their dark eyes watching, motionless, without judgment, as when taking something fully in. I know these eyes are wounds healed over or scars from branches fallen. And I know the language between us is untranslatable. But for the entire 3-mile hike, I sense their eyes behind me, holding me, as I might hold an overfull glass of water, meniscus trembling in the white winter sky. As they look with great precision, measure me as I grow smaller by the mailbox, letter in my hand. And though at a great distance, I can feel them taking in the loops and dips in the black script of the address and its return, as I might observe without distinction the wreaths of moss around their trunks if I were focusing on something else or everything at once. Northern Flicker. We got to see one only once, but it was pretty spectacular. They're a truly beautiful bird. I wish I could trade places with that bird. I'd slip into its elegant pattern of polka dots, some of them fading as into the folds of a fine silk blouse. On top of the flicker's fine-boned head, a flare of blue like the tea hat my mother wore on Easter Sundays. I'd gladly place it on my head and trill her hallelujahs if I could trust once more what she used to tell me, that if we could all just be good, we would suffer less. In these bright lit times, I am drawn to the flicker's name, the momentary dimming that it brings to mind, as when a hand passes close to a dinner candle. This next poem is called Gray Whale, and it's not a poem I've read aloud before, but thinking of preparing for this reading and us all being in quarantine, I started to think about, well, there's a part of us that even as close as we are to people we love, there's always a part of us in quarantine that no one really knows. So anyway, Gray Whale. When they read the metal tag on her pectoral fin, a surprise of dark Cyrillic letters on this gray whale, who had swum some 14,000 miles, interbraiding continent with continent, self with self. Strange that I think of you now, Father, though you too had lived mostly below a surface, the breadth of which we could not know. Until they read her tag, the cetologists had thought the gray whales off the coast of Baja were of a different species from the ones in Minsk. When I found your lacquer boxes, so small they fit into my hand, with their depictions of our home, the pots above the stove, their odd discolorations, the cheerful curtained window that looked out at the pines. I felt sad I had not known your heart would swim such distance for us. You had never shown us one. And how small you had to make yourself to see each scene and paint it, like an ant stepping carefully along one of those dark passages in its hill of dirt that nobody sees inside. I'm so grateful that during this year, my daughter Angie has become pregnant. It's a real bright spot to look forward to. And we have to find these bright spots, small and large, even if on some days it's something as simple as folding the laundry or writing a postcard to a friend. So this is for Angie. It's called After Winter Solstice. Because you are pregnant, the days grow rounder with light. The long oaks bend towards each other as through a glass orb. Loose blouses like snowdrifts. I wish I had sung to you more when you were inside me and carried you less like a marriage I knew was failing. I wish I could have kept my mind in the same place as my body. This year, the winter will not drag on. I will measure the slowly accruing light and your changing form. Who knows what settles as I watch you slice the peaches? Maybe a future entomologist's fingers are finding their first meticulous rhythm. Maybe the delicate register of your child's voice is gathering its notes. And then there are the little things that we miss during this time. I woke up today and really missed the simple act of going to the gym. This is an older poem and I'd like to end with it. Thanks so much for listening. It's called In the Woman's Locker Room. Over the tops of the lockers, I hear a woman talking, just the trail of her sentences, sentencing her listener to the silence of a tree, while she, like an animal, nose to the ground, follows the trail of her own words, her scent. Tense, she is on the prowl. She is talking about her body, her body. She can't decide if she wants to be fat with no wrinkles or skinny with wrinkles. But for now, she says she just wants to keep her muscles in tone, her muscles in tone to her. Be somebody, be somebody. Thanks so much for listening. And now I'd like to introduce my very dear friend, Nickole Brown. Nickole is the author of Sister and Fanny Says. She lives in Asheville, North Carolina, where she volunteers at several different animal sanctuaries. Note the pictures on Facebook. I love seeing them. She wrote To Those Who Were Our First Gods, which is a chapbook about animals, and it won the 2018 Rattle Prize. And her essay and poems, The Donkey Elegies, was published by Sibling Rivalry Press in 2020. She also co-wrote and published a book of prompts last year with her wife, Jessica Jacobs, called Write It, 100 Poetry Prompts to Inspire. And she and Jessica lead free generative writing sessions online every other Tuesday night through Sun June Literary Collaborative. And it doesn't say it here, but I think I saw that Naomi Shihab Nye chose it as a remarkable book to read. So that's really quite an honor. Anyway, please welcome Nickole Brown.
Thank you, Sally. And hello, dear ones. It is both making me feel good to know you guys are all here, but it also breaks my heart because every January now for just about the past 17 years, I start the year by coming down to Delray and seeing all of you. And I cannot wait until we can gather again in person. And until then, we'll just be grateful for this Jetsons style technology. I'm going to read just a little bit tonight from the chapbook that came out this year. It's called The Donkey Elegies, and it is an essay in poem. So this reading is going to be a little odd in that they're not titles. The essay is in 25 parts, and I'm going to read 7 of those short pieces. And what you need to know is that this book originated from my experience when I first started working with animals. I started volunteering at a nature center here in Asheville, North Carolina. And of course, they asked me, do you have any experience? And I said, no. And they handed me a shovel and sent me to the petting area. I was terribly disappointed because I wanted to work with the owls or the otters or the black bears. And they're like, here are the donkeys. And it was the perfect experience for me because what I found was that it was actually my idea or my preconception of donkeys that was getting in the way of me actually being able to understand and spend time with the actual being itself, which I think is a common human predicament that our ideas of things really do get in the way. So this essay that I wrote, I hope shows what the donkeys had to teach me, essentially. Ears like sugar scoops. Ears like hands cupped to cradle a cool drink from the creek. Ears like single petals of dahlias at full bloom, curled, firmly upright, but always soft, always open. Furred periscopes, one pivots to the wheezing scream of a squirrel above, and I follow. Hear as if for the first time that common arboreal cry, neither chirp nor growl, but something in between. Like the call of a mother blue jay stoked behind the teeth of an old yard dog. Your other ear blessed as I am, rotates towards me. Sweet apricots, velvet satellites, the twin souls atop the head of every donkey. At this animal park, I work to be near your otherworldly greeting, a thing you show off again and again, hollering while you inhale and hollering while you exhale, hollering while you breathe in and hollering while you breathe out, a didgeridoo kind of circular yowling, a way to play no other mammal can manage. A pleading that peals a juke band of hoorays anytime I bring fresh hay. But no one hears what I hear. Instead, passerbys can't help but laugh and laugh. To them, the hollering smacks of stupidity, or maybe orgasm, the open window kind heard from the street, urgent and hotly embarrassing. They offer crude imitations, guffaw their old MacDonald versions of your song, their fake brays of Eeyore, hee-haw, Eeyore, hee-haw, as they pass us by. Onomatopoetic maybe, but wrong. The real sound is the world's largest door swung wide, an open throat of rust and hinge. The caustic rocketing of a mother goose if she were born hoarse, a trumpeting animated by Dr. Seuss. This call is meant to travel and far, miles and miles across a vast expanse of desert made to survive the dry lonely for which this animal was made. I lean into the gyrating seesaws of tone, try to understand the shameless, insistent language of donkeys. Fur, the color of fawn grass. Long, bending, done in by the sun, or else fur, the carbonated gray of fog so thick it looks like the mountains here, on fire with dawn. Down your neck and from shoulder to shoulder, two dark lines make an X, marks the spot, and some call those ridges eel stripes, and others say the capital F Father himself drew that crucifix across your back. But I'm not fooled into thinking your liquid blinking in Maybelline lashes make a gentle beast. Like my mama and hers before, donkeys do not scare, but stand their ground, don't take off running as those gorgeous high-class horses do. In danger, a herd will face inward to huddle around its foals, tighten a circle of go ahead and try me, daring any predator near their fatal chorus line of kicking legs. Yes, any farmer knows you're a more savage guardian than any dog, and I recognize you as one of my own. Fierce matriarch, you'll stomp a hawk near your flock of hens, chase a bear away from your bleeding sheep, smash the white brains from a coyote who tries its teeth on a weaker donkey. In the Kentucky that made me, long before I was born, coal was the darkness torn from the dark, and donkeys the color of cavefish and moonlight hauled the ore cars. A history told by a few black and white photos and those few men not yet dead from black lung. It meant nothing to me, not the black coal or the white donkeys, not those worked to the bone workers, nor the glow of their tractable brutes. Those donkeys ghosted deep underground so long they would emerge decades later, completely blind. Angry and young, I was ready to kill off any part of me that smacked of those hillbilly roots. In a basement reeking of cat piss and strawberry wine, we did our best to blow apart speakers with heavy metal cranked loud. We let a blindfold do its work before spinning ourselves round and round, swinging a bat until one of us hit what we were aiming for with a satisfactory thud, thrilled to hear all those plastic-wrapped candies hit the concrete floor. Little did we know we were acting out our own trashy sort of morality play. What was really spilling from the split side of that white piñata, from that cheap papier-mâché donkey. Mary knew. Tupped by the Almighty, she was no fool now, knew that bright singe was the small, dark crown of a half-god insisting, making his way through the small door between her legs. Slumped in the swaying saddle, broken water wetting her blue robe black, her pains divine. She clutched the dusty tufts, yanked the hair from the root, took for her suffering the steady, uncomplaining mane of a donkey. Ungulate. Such a throat-stuck word. Ugly, buried right there in its syllables, just as where I'm from, capable is mostly a word for a woman ugly as sin, most likely with an ass to be worked off. Can you see me? My once young skin, fluorescent lit, a name tag pinned to my polyester shirt. Can you see the cashier who stood with me as I bagged, the brace she had to wear, squeezing up rolls on her back when she reached to scan your chips and cans? Or do you see me years later asking if you want a warm-up on that coffee? If I can get you some ketchup to go with that? I went to school, found a way out, but somewhere is another me, studying the schedule at the bus stop, clutching her pocketbook to her lap, eyeing the steady river of traffic, passing her with just one person in nearly every car. Do we dismiss sturdy, useful beings because we despise what we're afraid we'll become? Or is it just familiarity that breeds contempt? Foam and blood of the bit, strain of the yoke, clay so damn rain heavy and red it's bound to snap the legs that sink too deep and try to pull. Don't say stubborn. Don't say thick or slow or capable. Bless her heart. No, say thank you. Say please. Say I see you. Now slow down. Pull over. Look out over the fence and tell me if through the rain you don't recognize standing there that beautiful, necessary, weary donkey. And the last poem here. Blessed be. You know how it goes. Inherit the. In the stall, I stop for a pleasing sound, a steady prayer deep in the mill of teeth. An echo within his long and humble skull, a plain song of persistence, of hunger met with plenty of time to chew. Listen, Can you hear it too? In his dutiful mouth, the pulp and resignation, the grit and patience of everything grown by the sun, surrendered but saved, brought back by the common, low life, base-born, absolute holiness that is this donkey. So I don't suppose this next introduction takes too much rehearsal. It is the lovely woman to my side here, also known as my wife. Her name is Jessica Jacobs, and she's the author of the award-winning Take Me With You Wherever You're Going. That was published by Foray Books back in 2019. It was named one of that year's best poetry books by Library Journal. Her debut collection, Pelvis with Distance, which was published by White Pine in 2015, is a biography and poems of Georgia O'Keeffe, and that won the New Mexico Book Poetry Award and was finalist for the Lambda Literary Award. Ain't you fancy? She's the chapbook editor of Beloit Poetry Journal, and she'll be reading from a collection of poems responding to the book of Genesis. Please welcome Jessica Jacobs.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Nickole and Sally, Lorna, Angela. It's such an honor to be with you this evening. And Miles and Mimi and Jennifer and Susan, thank you for persevering in this strange virtual world. I miss you all, but I'm really grateful for all the faces I can see here and all of the unseen people who are taking the time to be here. Thank you. So I'll be reading from poems responding to the Torah, specifically the first book, the book of Genesis. And when I began doing this research, I felt like it was really important I had at least a basic knowledge of biblical Hebrew. So this first poem comes from some of my conversations with a woman I was studying with. And as a bonus, since I am really missing Florida, where I grew up and where I am always very happy to go every January at least, it lets you see a little bit of the Florida I grew up in. Prayer should be a tunnel, my Hebrew teacher says. And I'm a pigtailed kid again, descending from a blazing Florida day to the murky depths of SeaWorld's tunnel of terror. A massive glass passage through a seawater tank. Sharks glided by, fins foxed and furrowed as the edges of old treasure maps. Far above, the inaccessible surface rippled with a chainmail of light. Prayer should be a tunnel, she says again, making an O of her hands and pushing it out before her. My teacher, also a dancer, uses her body to create structures in the air. It should take you there, she says. English is not her first language, but by there, I know she means God. By tunnel, I think she means conduit, a direct channel in. A sign and line had shown a whale balanced atop one of the tunnel's glass blocks to demonstrate its fortitude, to tell me not to be afraid. But I was. Each shark with its hacksaw teeth was clearly meant for me. And it was only a matter of time before one gnawed its way through, bringing all the water rushing in. And what would happen first? Drowning or being devoured? For those like me rooted in terror, a moving sidewalk kept us in motion, easing us through the eerie underpass, acting just like time, which moves us without the need for us to move, which moves us whether or not we want it to. Prayer should be a tunnel, she says, but what words, what melody would let me make with my body such grand architecture in the air? Let me stand in one place and travel both out and in. Let me sink and not drown. Let me wander unafraid into the open mouth and emerge unscathed yet changed. So one of the real gifts of writing these poems during this time is just the incredible amount of wisdom I'm finding in these ancient texts, and just the surprising relevance in almost every story. And reading the story of Abraham going up to potentially sacrifice his son, I realized that so many of the horrors throughout history are because of actions people did based on blind faith, from the assassination of Dr. King to the insurrection at the Capitol. So this poem begins with an epigraph by the philosopher Eric Hoffer. Absolute faith corrupts as absolutely as absolute power. Why there is no Hebrew word for obey. 1. What came later was the real trial, because God knew Isaac would not die, while Abraham climbed the mountain believing he would. With conviction tempered in the fires of his faith, he'd walked up through the shaded valley, his son resolute ahead on the trail, behind Sarah, Isaac's mother, Abraham's wife, a small darkness in the distance, growing forever smaller. He bound his beloved son, pulled back his legs, wrenched back his arms, knotted his ankles to his wrists, and laid him on that altar like a child falling through the sky. He'd held the knife, knowing from every animal he'd ever sacrificed how his son would jerk and shudder when the blade opened his throat, the familiar smoke of offered flesh. 2. What came later was even with Isaac alive in the fields, inside Abraham was the knowledge of what he'd been willing to do. When they passed in the tent, Isaac rubbed a remembered ache in his shoulders and never again held his father's eye. Sarah, smelling the imagined ashes on her husband's fingers, the blood in the crease of his throat, turned from him in the night. And on every path Abraham walked from that day forward, his son as he had been, a small back, barely the span of his hand, slung with the kindling meant for his burning. 3. Seconds from the slaughter of the one meant to carry his line, the son he'd wanted all his life, who's to say the voice in his head was God? Judaism is not a faith, but a tradition. Doubt the crux of its conscience. Yet what came later on a Sabbath morning, centuries on, was a congregation in Pittsburgh reading this story of Isaac's binding, of Abraham's terrible bind, when a man burning with unquestioning belief entered with a gun and, with no better angel to stay his hand, opened fire, believing the death of Jews would keep our country safe, believing this massacre, elderly congregants bleeding out on the floor, was God's work. 4. Who would call such actions holy? And how many more times will each of us come down from a mountain, conviction knocking like a knife in our belt loop, stained with all we would have done? My daily gods are minor ones, of pride, of lust, of impatience and ease. Yet how many have I harmed on the way to what I thought was right, or with hindsight, on the way to what I wanted? Obey, obey, obey is everywhere in translation. The real word is Shema, listen. Let us turn from certainty and arm ourselves instead with questions. I'm going to end with a mostly more upbeat poem called Mazel Tov. Circular breather. The dog whines without ceasing, his tail thumping the wall beside the bed to call me up and out to the yard instead. In moonlight, the hydrangea's white blossoms are a zodiac of branch-bound constellations. Once God called Abraham out from his tent to the open field to count the uncountable lights above, promising offspring bountiful as dust, numerous as the stars. Like Abraham, I too left my land, my birthplace, my father's house. But the closest I have to an offspring is lifting his leg at the azalea, nose busy with the news the night air brings. Mazel Tov, we say at births and other joyous occasions, the Jewish go-to for congratulations. Yet Tov means good, and Mazel, constellation or destiny. And sometimes, like Abraham, you must leave the place that grew you to grow toward better stars. In the house, my wife is sleeping. A possum dens beneath the shed, and a family of black bears has designated our driveway a thoroughfare. Above, trees thick with summer frame a porthole of sky. Maybe, though, it's not always the stars that matter, but the space between them. The lines we draw to shape the absence, the lives we forge around what goes missing. From the deck, the cool breeze makes a festival of the silver-lit leaves. Under my palm, there's the warmth of his fur, the steady rise of his ribs. He doesn't know his kidneys are failing, that his muzzle is white as the winter our vet has said he will not live to see. Like all of us, he is dying. Like most of us, he doesn't know it. His chin on my leg. He trusts me with the weight of his head. So if I wish you Mazel Tov, know what I mean is, may you find a reason to open your door to the dark. I'll mean, may you live beneath good stars and take the time to notice. Thank you. And now I have the incredible honor of introducing our final reader for the evening, Angela Narciso Torres, who is a senior and reviews editor for Rhino and serves on the editorial panel of New England Review. And she is the author of the full-length poetry collection Blood Orange, which was published by Willow Books, the chapbook To the Bone, published last year by Sundress Publications, and very, very excitingly, the full-length collection What Happens Is Neither will be published next month. So go pick it up by Four Way Books. So please join me in welcoming Angela.
Thank you so much, Jessica. What a beautiful reading. Thank you to all my fellow readers tonight for your light and your inspiration and your heart, which I feel we need so much more of these days. Thank you to Miles and Mimi and Susan and Jennifer. Thank you, Marcy, and all the interns for making this happen against all the odds. I'd like to thank all the participants for being here tonight, for bringing their energy and their dedication to your craft, and especially my 5 conferees who I met with this weekend, Sylvia, Anne, Therese, Penny, and Jim, for trusting me with your work. May the conversations continue this week and beyond. So tonight is really special for me because it's the first time I'll be reading from this new book, What Happens Is Neither. It will be coming out in a few weeks from Four Way Books. And I'd like to just give a heartfelt thank you and shout out to Martha Rhodes, my publisher, who believed in this book even before I even dared to dream it could happen. So thank you, Martha. We're so lucky and so fortunate to have you with us this year. The impetus for this book was losing my mother to Alzheimer's disease in May of 2019, and then losing my father to cancer 11 days after. It meditates on motherhood and illness and mourning. It travels between childhood and adulthood over 2 continents to find what remains after loss, but also the many ways that we continue to reinvent ourselves and rediscover delight. I'll start with one of the self-portraits that is in this book. There are several. The first one is self-portrait as rosary beads, and it was inspired by this little travel rosary bead that my mom gave me. It's a set of 10, so it's just 1 decade. You can have it in your pocket and carry it wherever you go. It's made from pressed rosebuds, so it's fragrant. And it became kind of a talisman of sorts for me, and I carried it around with me throughout what has been a year of losses, not just for me, but for so many others. And we carry all of that with us. Self-portrait as rosary beads. Curled amid lint and loose change, tucked in a jacket's satin lining, or crushed with used gum in seams of denim, I've known pain clinics and airports, taxi cabs and stale schoolrooms where time is a honeycomb in winter. I am olive wood, carnelian, plastic, black onyx. Am rosebuds pressed into fragrant spheres. Your heat is my musk, your worry, my fire. Pick your mystery. If Tuesday, sorrowful. If Saturday, glorious. I've held you in grocery lines, picket lines, the hours between sleepless and woken. Hold me. I am glass shattered, smoothed by my mother's nerves, pillowed beneath her cheek. Counted, accountable, counting, counted on. Crystallized, dangled on a string or hung from a mirror in a river of traffic. Praying for green, for an end, for a mutiny of rain. Litany of sorrows, of praise. I'm a crown of roses, a crown of purple thorns. I'm faithful as breadcrumbs on barbed wire. Lose me to birds or to night's starred thicket. Touch me and be splintered, sundered, soothed, surrendered. My scent on your fingertips. So I grew up in the Philippines, but migrated to America in my 20s. And this is one of the few poems I've written about that year of transition. Confessions of a Transplant. My first year living in America, the scent of frying garlic sent me weeping. My eyes swept the somber avenues, starving for color. I devoured the aquamarine of broken glass, a wire festooned with yellow shoes, the shower of plum blossoms on a sidewalk. The memory of sour mangoes made rivers in my mouth. At the market, I picked the greenest nectarines, dredged them in salt that stung my chapped lips. Words I hoarded like rock candy, melted on my tongue like my 2 hard R's. Range Rover, Red Robin, River Rock. I practiced into the ear of an empty flagon, reciting litanies to the saint of lost things. The walls echoed with whispers. Lying lily still in the goblet of night, I drank the croons of nameless birds. So I first came to this festival as a participant in 2019, and I was a student in Gregory Pardlow's workshop. This next poem, which also appears in this new book, was written in that workshop, and it was an incredibly generative and life-changing workshop for me in many ways. So I dedicate this to all the participants, and I hope this experience is just as magical and productive as that first workshop was for me. This poem is Nocturne. Awake beneath an onyx sky, you crack the blinds, inhale night's fading ink. The air is your mother's breath on your skin. The only steeple is the church of palms in the neighbor's yard, dropping vermilion fruit on the grass. On another coast, everyone you know is sleeping, except for a boy you love. In his body ticks a clock that matches yours. Darkness seeps from blades of palmetto the way water leaves your fingers after a bath. To see the darkness, one must look darkly. Hours later, this boy will feed his cat, perform his daily ministrations like a mother. What is parenting but a prayer for one's young? Outside, the white ibis of dawn unfurls the potted mint, its ribbons of scent. Sun, your shadow lives in my eyes. I have one more poem. Thank you for being so patient. I know it's been a long day, a long night. The last poem will be the title poem of my book, What Happens Is Neither. The book is dedicated to my parents, Francisco and Carmen. As I said, I lost them 2 years ago. And I also mentioned that I believe in talismans. And another one I keep close is my father's violin. And it's right here. I brought it back with me from the Philippines. And it ended up being so powerful for me in writing this book, which I completed almost a month after they passed, and then learned shortly after that it was going to be published. So it really saved my life in a way that year, that difficult year. And the violin was really crucial in the last few years of my parents' life because it became the only form of communication between my father and my mother when she lost her language. And I started accompanying him on the violin, on the piano, as he played the violin to her when I would visit them. And it was just so nice to see her eyes light up. As they say, music memory is the last to go with people who suffer from Alzheimer's. So the violin makes an appearance in this poem. What happens is neither the end nor the beginning. Yet we're wired to look for signs. Consider the peonies. One makes a perfect bud after months of nothing. Another's leaves are ringed with black rot. How can I not think end? How can I not say beginning? Leaves fall when days shorten because a tree must reduce to its tough parts, twig, branch, bark. My mother sleeps away the daylight. She nods off while chewing a spoonful of fish and rice, her head a peony gone to seed. Father calls to say she doesn't recognize him. Turning to him, she cried out, certain a stranger was in her bed. He played his violin till she slept, a leaf in late fall, curling into itself. In autumn, chlorophyll disappears, canceling green from leaves so yellow and magenta can blaze. In my mirror, I see her, the smile that favors a cheek, eyes slanting in the shape of small fish we eat for breakfast. Trees know best the now of things. What goes on has been going on for centuries. Washing dishes, I rest my foot on a standing leg. A fork clangs on the tile. I rinse a cracked cup. I try not to think of endings. Thank you so much.